Thanks for tuning in to the EthnoCO podcast, where our motto is helping people, help plants, help people. Please check out the links below and donate to our GoFundMe and Patreon to support the show.
We want to bring you a podcast that is inspiring, exciting, and scholarly, and share a bit of our curiosity about plants, people, anthropology, botany, shamanism, native cultures, environmentalism, and adventures in ethnobotany. Enjoy the show. The year is 2023. You're a human being. You're on the internet. You're looking for an interesting podcast about a variety of exciting subjects that have to do with anthropology, plant medicine, culture, preserving the environment, and saving the planet. You stumble upon the EthnoCO podcast. So we're here with Callum, as always, and he's going to talk a little bit about our podcast.
This is episode 0 of the EthnoCO podcast, introduction to the Ethnobotanical Conservation Organization, EthnoCO. I'm Callum, co-host, and this is my co-host Scott, the founder of EthnoCO itself. So Scott, can you jump right in and just tell us what is EthnoCO and what is ethnobotany?
Sure. So EthnoCO, or as Callum said, the Ethnobotanical Conservation Organization, which is why we call it EthnoCO, so we don't have to say that every time, excuse me, is an organization dedicated to the preservation of ethnobotanical plants and ethnobotanical knowledge and the dissemination of knowledge about that. And we have sort of trended more towards an organization, a company. We are a for-profit company, just to be 100% transparent with everybody. We're a for-profit company, and we run tours in Peru. So we focus on indigenous culture. We take people to parts of the Andes and Amazon where we interact with the native people, such as the Quechuas and the Machingas. Those people are our main focus. And we learn about their culture. We learn about their way of life. We learn about their medicinal plants, and we try to learn from them about how they interact with the planet in a more positive way. That's a lot easier on the Earth, on the planet, than the way Western civilization works with the planet. So we also sell artisanal handicrafts from the natives. So we sell textiles from Peru. There's a weaving tradition in Peru that stretches back thousands and thousands of years. We sell things from the Machinga, the native people in the Amazon as well, such as necklaces and just sort of indigenous handicrafts that help support these communities in a positive way that celebrates their culture, where they can, a lot of these communities have one foot in modern culture and one foot in the ancient, and it's a better way for them to get money than cutting down trees or doing something along those lines. So we try to have a positive influence on the cultures we work with and push them in a positive direction. They are in the driver's seat, but we try to, while interacting with them, influence them in a positive way. So EthnoCO basically is a company dedicated to ethnobotany and native cultures and preserving them, protecting them, and helping them flourish in the 21st century.
Yeah, and likewise, it seems like more and more people are really interested in having a different, maybe more of an authentic experience when they go to a place like Peru. So we've met clients from backgrounds in filmmaking to book writing to university students to people looking for a bit of a different holiday. Some people wanted a full expedition, others want a really more of a comfortable experience to go see wildlife and learn from native people. And EthnoCO is a great platform, from my experience, to provide that win-win situation between helping people out who live in these places and collaborate with them on their terms and actually get to know what they need, and also provide really tailored tours and opportunities for anyone. We make a lot of EthnoCO.
Yeah, so we try to be supportive rather than exploitative of these indigenous people and native cultures. I mean, there are over 1 million tourists a year, at least there was before COVID, that visit Machu Picchu and thus Peru every year. So there are many, many people that visit Peru every year, and we want to be a part of that. There's a lot of people in the Western world that have woken up to the fact that we're destroying the planet and that we're not super happy in our own society, and they want to go and learn from indigenous cultures, and that's something that we want to help facilitate. So yeah, we do everything from like really cushy, 5-star hotels and really nice restaurants to serious expeditions where you'll get wet and dirty and cold and and have a great time in that way as well, but something a little more difficult and down to earth. So Callum had asked, am I coming through okay, Callum? I noticed it was freezing a little bit.
That froze for about 20 seconds, but what you said just continued the whole time, so we can edit that.
Okay, we'll cut that out. If you notice any issues, maybe just stick a hand out. I'll cut this out later. So Callum had asked, what is ethnobotany? And Callum knows, he's asking for you, the listener. Ethnobotany is...
It's the most underrated field of study to get involved in. It's so interesting and so strange and weird and exciting and enlightening.
What excites me so much about it, putting the cart before the horse here, but what excites me so much about it is the diversity of subjects you can study in ethnobotany. So it incorporates anthropology, pharmacology, sociology, botany. It history of the world and migrations of people. It intermingles all these different subjects so well together, and there's just if you get tired of one aspect of ethnobotany, if you get tired of the anthropological aspect, you can go into the chemistry or pharmacology aspect. Anyway, but we haven't said what is ethnobotany. Ethnobotany, so ethno, people, botany, plants. Ethnobotany is the relationship between plants and people. So it is the study of how people interact with plants, how specific cultures interact with plants, and how those plants are viewed in a specific culture. So, for example, to talk about cannabis for just a second, because it's a really good example of how cultures can view the same plant. It's the same plant, but it can be viewed radically different in different cultures. So if you imagine cannabis or marijuana in the 1950s in the United States, most people viewed it in an extremely negative way. Thought it'd make it go crazy. There were people that liked it, of course. We're not going to discuss the entire ethnobotany of cannabis, but it was viewed fairly negatively by the broader society. Now, let's say, so that's one way. That's the ethnobotany of cannabis in the United States in the 1950s. Let's look at the ethnobotany of cannabis in ancient India, among Hindu practitioners in ancient India. It was viewed in a completely different way. It was viewed as a sacred plant. It was a connection. I believe the god is Shiva. I should have looked that up before I did this, but cannabis was viewed in a completely different way. So those two ideas show us the ethnobotany of cannabis in two cultures, and they're radically different. But it's both ethnobotany, the way that the society views and interacts with a specific plant. And it doesn't have to be psychoactive plants. It doesn't have to be cannabis or kava or betel nut. It doesn't have to be, or tobacco. It doesn't have to be something that alters the mind. Potatoes are an ethnobotanical. So, yucca, carrots are ethnobotanicals. An ethnobotanical is any plant that people use. So ethnobotany is the relationship between plants and people, and an ethnobotanical is any plant that people use for any reason. So a very broad subject, and the way they view them, the way they're thought about in these different societies. So that is what ethnobotany is. Callum, want to add?
It's amazing. Yeah, it's like that side of that part of the study of ethnobotany, of just how people and cultures and societies view and relate with a particular plant, and whether it's favored at the time or it's of value or the values change. It's fascinating. Like tobacco would be very similar to cannabis in that respect. It's one of probably the most sacred plants throughout the Americas in First Nations groups. Peace pipe tobacco, or any of the Amazonian ceremonies of powdered tobacco or smoking tobacco. And then you bring it forward to popularization of tobacco, normalizing of tobacco use and habitual use, creating some health effects from that, moving towards, in Australia at least, phasing out tobacco or cigarettes, I should say. And it's still the same plant. It's been manipulated into products and things, but it's still the same plant. Society has changed its views and its decisions on it throughout what you could say is probably thousands of years.
Yep.
But particularly in the last, say, 50 years, since things have been changing in those respects to those ethnobotanicals.
So we did jump the gun a little bit. We should have mentioned that this episode is the introduction, and that we're going to kind of just go through what this podcast will be about, because me and Callum plan on doing this for quite a while, and this is just going to be sort of the basis of the various topics we're going to discuss. So we'll briefly touch on topics today, and then we will do specific podcasts in the future. That's why this is episode 0, the introduction. We'll do specific podcasts in the future about each topic that we're talking about today. So the next thing I was going to touch on is just, EthnoCO is based in the United States, the Eastern U.S. We have a sort of home base here, but we do most of our work in Peru. And I was just going to talk briefly about Peru as well. So Peru is we'll go from the very beginning. Peru is a country in South America. It is on the Pacific coast of South America. It borders Colombia, Ecuador, Brazil, and Bolivia, and Chile a little bit. And it is a beautiful, amazing country. There are 42 different languages spoken in Peru today, now. Obviously, there were pre-Columbian, pre-1492 cultures that flourished in Peru, and there are 3 main bioregions, even though let me say this first. There's 3 main bioregions. You have basically the coast, you have the Andes Mountains, and you have the Amazon rainforest. The coast, which is on the side of the Pacific, is pretty dry in most places. That's where Lima is, Trujillo, and the coastal cities. And there you have the most Spanish and European influence. You go up in the Andes, and the Andes Mountains are the largest mountain range, the tallest mountain range outside the Himalayas. So you have mountains that are approaching 6,000 meters. Yes, 6,000. Yeah.
They're over 6,000. I think there's a 7,000 meter mountain there.
I think it's like
almost.
If you're watching the podcast, write in and tell us which one's right. I think it's 6,000. Yeah. Anyway, we'll look it up. They got some big high mountains, and going down the other side, you have the Amazon rainforest, which has the cloud forest when the moisture runs into the Andes Mountains. And it has lowland rainforest as well. And you have one of the most biodiverse places on planet Earth. And as I mentioned, with 42 different languages spoken, many, many different cultures, and many, many different plants to be studied and to be learned about through the lens of various cultures. So Peru is a very, very biodiverse place. I have some notes here that I will get into. Callum, do you want to add anything to that?
Just on that concept of bioregions or biozones, climate zones, and then therefore they have created cultural zones. So you could go from, I think within the Andes, you can be at high altitude, could be pampas, which is, I think pampas is more like a high altitude grassland, can be covered in snow part of the year. all the way, not that far away. It's like a day's walk sometimes down a valley, and you'll be in temperate. You'll be in a temperate Andean valley kind of climate. And then a little bit further, you'll be in cloud forest. And so you see the dynamics of high diversity and density of different climate zones in the one country have given rise to so many different languages, people, and diversification of crops and indigenous species of plants and animals in those areas. Hence why it's a place of such biological diversity and significance for wildlife and people, and cultivation as well.
Yeah, so it's said that there's over 3,000 types of potatoes in Peru, and there's just a plethora of plants. You have everything from sweet potato, yucca, chili peppers, cotton, quinoa, uyuco, which is another tuber species, an oxalis species. You have tarwi, aguamanto, which is also known as gooseberry. It's in the solanaceous family. It's kind of this sweet tomato-y thing. You have lupin species that are cultivated. Obviously, you have coca, tobacco, chili peppers, as I said, such as the rocoto, which is a sort of specific type of pepper native to Peru. Cacona, which is another one in the solanaceous family. There's just and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So yeah, Peru has just such a wide variety of plants and cultures. And probably the reason they have, for example, 3,000 different types of potatoes is because each little community, usually Quechuas and Aymaras, bred the potatoes. Each little community would have a slightly different climate zone, and as they replanted their potatoes over thousands of years, they became unique, and they changed into a specific type that would grow in that area. So the diversity of cultures and climates has affected the plant life, and obviously the cultivated plants a whole lot.
So shout out to all of the Aymara and Inca folk and Quechua folks and everyone back in human history and everyone to this day who's been carrying the torch and continuing to diversify and conserve all of that cultivated plant diversity for us to benefit in the West at our tables, chomping into different potatoes and tomatoes and all kinds of things.
So as I said, with this podcast, we're going to be all over the place. So let's really be all over the place. Every time we eat potatoes, that's from the Andes. Every time in Italy that someone puts tomato sauce on their spaghetti, that is a plant from the Americas. So they did not have that before the 1500s. Every curry dish in India and every spicy chili dish in Thailand did not exist before these plants, because chilies, the capsicums, are brought from the Americas. They didn't exist over 500 years ago. That's a recent thing. So, the Americas and the people of the Americas did us such a great service, as Callum mentioned, by breeding all of these plants over thousands of years for us. And I have a question for Callum, and I don't think he actually, we'll see. I don't know if he knows the answer to this or not. And this is sort of my answer. There could be different answers, but what do you think are the two plants in human history that have eased the most human suffering? And I'll give you a clue. One of them's from the old world, and one of them's from the new world. So kind of think medicines maybe, but the two plants that have eased the most suffering.
Is it quinine or quinine?
Yes, you got one.
Yeah, cool. So anti-malarial ethnobotanical. Is that right? And it's from the Amazon in Peru.
The only effective malaria treatment until the invention of pharmaceuticals, or at least the manipulation of quinine or quinine. So if you're British or Aussie, you probably say quinine, and in America we say quinine, but same thing. Yeah.
That's incredible, and that's in tonic water still to this day.
And
no one knows what what it is and why it's in there. And that's probably, a whole story of why it's in tonic water.
We could do a whole podcast about that, but in absinthe as well. But supposedly, the British Empire, I believe when they were in India, were losing more men to malaria than to the fighting that was going on, the British military. And they gave their soldiers quinine pills, and they told them to take them, and they didn't really take them. They're like, oh, yeah, I'll be fine, whatever. But when they mixed the quinine with their booze, everybody took it every day. They didn't miss a day of treatment.
Yeah.
It was mixed with their
every
alcohol.
soldier got their like booze ration.
Yeah.
And they drink like tonic water and like gin and tonic.
Yep.
Is that an Indian, like a British Indian drink of the army?
It was a British concoction that was supposed to keep away malaria. So a lot of the botanicals in gin were in there to prevent malaria or other diseases. And I'm not sure when exactly they figured out that quinine was the main ingredient that kept malaria away, but eventually they did. But the gin and tonic is mostly used to prevent malaria.
Incredible. So what was the second one?
Do you have a guess?
Plant. That eased the most human suffering in history.
Yep.
It's a hard one because I think a lot of fungal-based things like penicillin, but plant-based.
That's a great one. Sure, absolutely. I'll give you a hint. If you got... Yeah, we're going to touch back on the potato in a second. If you broke your leg or you got in a car wreck, what will we give you? Or a derivative of it?
Oh, well, morphine.
Yeah, which is from?
The poppy, the opium poppy. Wow,
yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Papaver soniferum, the opium poppy. So with the curing of malaria, the treatment of malaria, and the treatment of pain, even to this day, there isn't much that can touch, morphine and its derivatives that can ease pain like derivatives of the opium poppy. So that is my opinion. Other people may have other opinions, but I think the quinine and opium derivatives have eased more human suffering than any other plants on the planet. And real quick, before we go to the next thing, I'll touch on something else. So the potato is from the Andes, but it was obviously taken to Europe, and it was used extensively. And there's a whole sort of botanical disaster that happened in the 1840s, I believe, with the Irish potato famine. And that happened because they had a potato that was very genetically, it was not diverse. It was a very,
homogenized.
It was very, I'm not
derivative, yeah.
Yeah, a genetically narrow window that it was operating in. There's a better word for it, but the reason why it got the blight so bad was because once the blight infected one of the potatoes, it was able to infect all of the genetically similar potatoes. And so, could we go back in history and introduce other potatoes into Ireland at the time? And like I said, I'd like to do a whole podcast about this, but there were 8 million people in Ireland in the 1830s, 1840s, and there are only 5 million people in Ireland today. It is one of the only places on the planet that the population has gone down so significantly, and that's because they either starved to death or they left.
Yeah.
Anyway, another
biggest export of Ireland is the Irish, right?
That's right, exactly.
They changed the new world.
Yep. So we'll do a whole podcast on that one day. And I'll let Callum comment on, what we just talked about. Like I said, this one's going to really be all over the place. The next one is shamanism. But Callum, I'll let you, if you got anything to say on that.
Oh, no, it's just interesting if you played around with alternative histories and you jumped back in time and gave them about 100 types of potato, let alone 3,000 that were available. Probably would have avoided all of that and changed history altogether. who would have arrived in New York City and the New World, creating a new life for themselves in the United States?
That's
Might not have been
something
Irish.
that's something we will certainly touch on when we do the Irish Potato Famine podcast. But we'll move on for now. So the next question is, so what is shamanism? So shamanism is defined by anthropologists who know more than me as shamanism is a religion or a spiritual practice, whatever you want to call it, that makes direct connection with the divine. So other religions may talk about the divine, they may pray to the divine, but in shamanism, you have a direct channel, a direct connection to the divine. And that's usually achieved by 3 methods. Not always, but usually 3 methods. And that's dreaming, drumming, or drugs. Now, by drumming, we mean music. So dreaming, drumming, or drugs. And the practitioner enters a sort of ecstatic state. Sometimes it's very different depending on which particular practice it is. They may be laying in an apparently sleeping, or they may be dancing around and shaking and moving and speaking in tongues, but shamanism is a religion that makes a direct connection with the divine.
And shaman is a word from the language of Siberia, is that right?
Yep, that's right, yep.
So obviously shamanism will have different names all over the world, but interesting, it's come out of the far northeast of Russia and spread across the world in a way that we describe this shamanism.
So some people today have a problem with the word shaman because let's get into this first. So yes, it is the word that anthropologists picked up in I want to say it was the 1700s. I might be wrong about that, but I want to say the 1700s. To describe this religious practice of a direct connection with the divine. Now, some people today have a problem with this because they say, well, they're not a shaman. Shaman's only from this Siberian culture. I think it's the Tsunga. I can be wrong. We'll look that up. And you should call for example, in Quechua, it's a hampi. In Machinga, it's a serepegari. Serepegari means the one intoxicated by tobacco. But I would say shaman as a generic term is fine to use. I have no problem with people using it as a generic term because, okay, so if you can, it's great to call each culture their shamanic style practitioner by their name. Quechua Hampi, Machinga Serepagari, trying to think of another culture. I think in Haiti it's a Bokur. Anyway, but if you're talking generally about practitioners that have a direct connection with the divine, I think shaman or shamanism is a just fine word. That's a kind of controversial topic. I just thought I'd touch on that really quickly, but yeah.
That's cool. That is, yeah. That's a whole other podcast almost, and which we will touch on with animals that have been used as drugs and animals that use drugs. And we'll touch on, we'll re-journey back to the northeast of Russia and explain a little bit about the shamans of the far north there and the reindeer herders and how that all plays in with entheogenic plant use.
Yeah, who use Amanita muscaria, the mushroom from Mario, from Fairy Tales. And we'll touch on that a little bit in a minute, but
cool.
We have 2 more terms to define. We have entheogen and psychoactive, or psychoactive plants. So what is an entheogen? Callum, do you want to do that one? You want me to do it? Or?
Entheogen is, from what I know, a plant that enables its user to connect with the divine.
Yep. So it's literally entheogen. It's a generator of theos. something that can generate a direct connection with the divine. So some people have a problem with that term. They prefer psychedelic or hallucinogen, but I like it. Whenever I've taken psychedelics or entheogens, I've certainly felt a connection with the divine. So an entheogen is something that generates God or a divine experience from within. But touching on the ethnobotany of this, an entheogen in different cultures has a different context. So peyote or ayahuasca is almost always an entheogen. However, there are people that microdose, and that's another controversial subject, but there are people that microdose with peyote or ayahuasca. So they're not using it as an entheogen, they're using it as a cognitive enhancer. And most people, for example, most people drink green tea because it tastes good and it gives you a bit of caffeine. However, in the context of a Japanese tea ceremony, where they sit down and there's this huge importance in their culture, there's this huge ceremony surrounding it, and they very reverently stir the tea and they make it in a specific way, and the practitioner themselves feels a certain way when they're undergoing this. They take on it takes on a reverence, and they make a connection, a spiritual connection with the divine. In the context of a Japanese tea ceremony, green tea could be an entheogen. Or wine with the Catholics. So drinking a small amount of wine, and the purpose is to drink the blood of Christ. That could be an entheogen in that context. So entheogens are different things in different cultures. Or you could eat peyote like just for fun or whatever. You might get an entheogenic experience that you weren't ready for, but
yep.
you might not. So an entheogen is something that generates God from within or a divine experience, and it's different among different cultures.
Yeah, it has a little bit of a personal or a cultural lens or angle on it, whereas we hear probably in the scientific community might hear more psychoactive, which might be more a generalistic description of something that is psychologically active. It interacts with our brains and our brain chemistry, bodily chemistry in some way. So it's a little more reductionist and simplified in a way.
Sure.
Because that's easier to objectively identify as, yes, it is interacting with part of our brain, whereas entheogenic, there's a whole cultural angle on that perspective that you need to understand. And it's very hard to measure for a lot of people.
Right. You have to take entheogen in the context of the culture or even the individual person. But yeah, Callum, so our next one was psychoactive or psychoactive plants. Callum just defined it. It is anything that alters your psyche in any way. So it could be the same as drug, but not exactly, because aspirin's a drug, or ibuprofen's a drug, but that doesn't alter your psyche. The psychoactive is something that alters your psyche. It does something more than just remove hunger or thirst. So caffeine, for example, nicotine, it gives you a buzz, it gives you a bit of energy. So all the way from caffeine to LSD, those are psychedelics. It doesn't have to be a plant.
Scott, how many psychoactives do you think the average person ingests or uses every day? And this is an open-ended question. There's no answer to this. It's more of personal reflection for anyone listening. How many psychoactives have you used today?
Yeah.
And actually think about what that is. Most of us are using them every day.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, for me today, it was, caffeine and nicotine, and I had a beer earlier. So it would be caffeine, nicotine, and alcohol are the psychoactives that I've ingested today. But, also, let's, I think you know the answer to this, but I want to ask you. But after caffeine is the most widely consumed psychoactive on planet Earth. What is the second most widely consumed? Or wait, is it the third?
I think I know the question and answers to this because I ask people all over the place. It's fascinating. What are the three
Top three.
most used plant-based psychoactives
Yep.
in the world in relation to how many people are using them?
Sure. So
And
tell
yes,
us.
number one is caffeine-containing plants because almost 1 billion people in China are drinking tea,
Yep.
let alone India, the rest of Asia, English culture,
U.S. with coffee.
coffee,
Yeah.
coffee. I just had a bit of acai today, which is a Brazilian berry that is just a beautiful, like a blueberry with lots of antioxidants, delicious. Not a psychoactive, but this particular product came with guarana, which
Nice.
is a berry from the Amazon that has caffeine in it. So I think it's said to be one of the highest level caffeine in this one berry. So there's like energy drinks that have guarana in it and stuff like that.
So we're going to have to do a whole podcast on caffeine-containing plants because guarana is a super interesting plant. You have cola nut, obviously coffee and tea, Camellia sinensis. You have Yapon holly, which not many people know about. North America's only caffeine-containing plant. You have yerba mate. Black drink, yep. You have yerba mate, Ilex paraguarensis, and then you have the highest caffeine-containing plant on Earth, which is Ilex guayusa, or guayusa, from the Amazon. A whole nother podcast there.
Yeah.
What are the... Sorry,
That's
go ahead.
awesome. We should definitely break that one down as like the most popular psychoactive in the world. And number two is tobacco.
Yep.
So tobacco, it's native throughout North, Central, and South America. A lot of First Nations groups have been using it for a long time, and I guess the Western world spread it to the rest of the planet that didn't actually have it growing naturally. So,
yeah, really interesting thing to touch on before you say the third plant, because I know you know it. One way that anthropologists, especially in the past, could tell if a culture had never been contacted by the outside, and I'm thinking mostly of Papua New Guinea. In the highlands of Papua New Guinea, there's some extremely isolated people. They would ask them if they wanted some tobacco. And if they said yes, like they immediately knew what it was, they'd say, you've been contacted, at least down the chain, from different traders and your local people brought it in. But if they had no idea because everybody likes tobacco, apparently. It's highly regarded in Papua New Guinea. In New Guinea, I should say. But yeah, one way they would tell if they had never been contacted was if they had no idea what tobacco was. So yeah, what's number three?
number three is from Southeast Asia. And it's another oral psychoactive. It's a chewable.
Yep.
It's betel nut.
Yep.
And I had it the other day, a couple of weeks ago for the first time, because there's a huge, there's a huge population of people from Malaysia, from India, from Southeast Asia in Melbourne, and a lot of them. Once you see what the plant is, what the psychoactive is in people's mouths, really, you'll see the coloration in their mouth. You notice they're chewing something. I just asked, "Is that betel nut?" And he said, "Yeah, it is. You want some?" Straight away.
Yes.
And it's very, very popular. And it was great. Really cool.
So yeah, betel nut, Areca catachu, I think I'm saying that right. That's the botanical name, is a palm tree, a sort of palm tree. And yeah, actually, maybe the podcast should just be on stimulants of the world. That would give us more diversity. But anyway, it is extremely widely used. It is a nut, and it's often mixed with another plant known as piper beetle. So piper, the Piperaceae, the black pepper, and the kava family, it's usually combined with that and a bit of lime or baking soda sort of substance. And it's chewed, much like tobacco or coca leaf or something like that. But that's probably the third most widely used drug on planet Earth. So point being, psychoactives are very, very widely used. Most people, so you're in the minority if you do not use a psychoactive every day. The majority of people on this planet, the majority of human beings, use some sort of psychoactive substance every day. And it may be as benign as caffeine, or it may be, goes all the way through the range of different psychoactives and different drugs. So the next topic we're gonna talk about is how long has this been done? Is this a new thing? Is this something that that is foreign to our culture, that is foreign to being human, or is it something that is very much part of being human? And the answer to that is, Callum, do you want to say anything?
It goes back a long way. It's probably a new experiment to not partake in anything. If you look at the demographic percentages of how many people are using psychoactives and how many are not.
And let's be clear for a second, for anybody that stumbled upon this podcast and is kind of not into these things, we're not like saying it's good to be a drug addict or something. We're just saying that it is an integral part of human culture, and that if you consider caffeine to be a drug, you'll sort of get a better understanding of what we're talking about. So psychoactive use predates the Homo genus, the genus of people. It predates not just humanity, not just Homo sapiens. It predates all of mankind and goes way, way further back than that. And what I consider one of our most interesting podcasts that I'm super excited about is doing the podcast about animals that use drugs and animals that are used as drugs. And so you got everything from catnip, cats that smell catnip and get frisky and run around or lay down and roll in it or whatever. There are lemurs that chew on these centipedes and they spray this stuff in their face and they rub it all over themselves. I mean, the innate desire to seek altered states of consciousness is not something that's unique to humans. There's dolphins, we're going to save this, but there's dolphins that do a certain thing with a pufferfish, and we'll talk more about that. So it's an extremely ancient usage.
So just how long have people been doing this?
So there's a lot of evidence that people have been doing this for a very, very long time. Not only the animal evidence, which, if animals do it and we evolved, came from animals, then likely we've been doing it for many thousands of years, but we have physical evidence of usage of peyote and San Pedro that go back very, very far. So peyote is Lophiophoria williamsi, and San Pedro or Wachuma is a Trichocereus species. And
so just to kind of explain that to people who might not be familiar with it, they're a cactus species. San Pedro is quite a tall cactus, almost like a stereotypical desert cactus with the branching arms, really quite tall. Yep. And how big are peyote?
Peyote are these little sort of button-shaped cacti that are not very big, but they contain mescaline as the main active ingredient. And there is a cave in Texas, in North America, United States, where they found dried peyote in sort of a ritual, ceremonial context. I think they found it with ceramics and maybe, I'm not sure exactly, but it was determined to be peyote that was used in religious spiritual ceremonies, called the Shumla cave. And they found that it was 5,200 years old. Jesus. from present.
Pre-Jesus, I should say.
One interesting thing about it was that the mescaline was still intact in the peyote. It had not degraded in that amount of time. And then there is reports of San Pedro, Wachuma, in Peru from about 9,000 years ago in this place called the Cave of the Guitarrero the guitarist cave. There is extremely old evidence, and actually we should probably do a whole podcast about how old is your favorite plant. So if you drink tea or coffee or tobacco or whatever, what is the oldest evidence we can find of its usage? I think that would be a really interesting podcast. So that's physical evidence that I mentioned just now, the peyote and the San Pedro found in these locations. But there's circumstantial or non-physical evidence that you can find as well, such as that in Tassili in Ajir, which is in Algeria, I'm pretty sure. It's in northern Africa. Terence McKenna talks a lot about this in, I'm not sure where the book is, but in
Food of the Gods.
Food of the Gods, yep. You got it.
Yeah, I've got it. Somewhere. Find it.
So these, there we go. Yep. Maybe while you're talking, if you want to find the picture, if you can.
Oh, yeah.
So this is kind of circumstantial evidence. It is not clear. They did not find dried mushrooms, but they found cave paintings that seem to depict the usage of mushrooms, the entheogenic psychoactive. There we go. So these are the shamans, which appear to have mushrooms all over them. I think there's another picture of them sort of running through their hallucinations. Is that in there?
Might have been the next one.
Yeah, that one.
See that?
Love that one. It's kind of hard to see. We could post links to that, but if you search Terence McKenna, Food of the Gods, mushrooms. Anyway, so that's
it's called the Mushroom Runners from Tassili.
Yeah.
So you can search for that photo, or we'll put it up.
That's about, I think it's 8,000 to 10,000 years old, but that's not as solid of evidence as actual physical dried plants. But anyway, the usage of psychoactives and religions based around them are extremely, extremely ancient. Something I'll touch on really quickly, and we'll talk more about it when we do the podcast about how ancient certain plants are. There is this tendency for certain people who study these things to do what I call entheogenic reductionism, where they reduce every culture, every ancient religion into an entheogenic religion or something that involves entheogens. I do not think that's true. I don't think that every religion, every single one, is involved with entheogens. They may have aspects of that in their religion, but not every single one. So don't think that I'm saying that, all of human culture and religion comes from entheogens, but there certainly is a great deal a great amount that entheogens, psychoactive plants, influence early human cultures. There is the idea that the agricultural revolution happened because people stumbled upon fermenting grains or fermenting fruits, and they began to cultivate them, and they had to stay in one place to cultivate them and to watch their pots of bubbling liquid that they wanted to get drunk on. And there's some evidence and some theories that maybe early people started staying in one place instead of being nomadic hunters and gatherers because they were so interested in getting drunk.
Yeah, which was, I think there's some really early accounts of fermenting honey into mead, but it wasn't called mead until I think the Europeans got hold of it. Yep. Same thing though, fermented honey in Africa. And a lot of hunters would go out, collect it, and ferment it and drink it later.
Yep. And like I said, there's some evidence that maybe that's why early nomadic hunter-gatherers decided to settle down. So next, we're going to touch on, real quick, we'll touch on Huantar, which is a temple in central Peru that is based upon a religion that is clearly psychedelic, entheogenic. They definitely used San Pedro cactus or Huachima, Brugmansia, and probably Yopo or Sabel. And we'll quickly touch on the psychoactives of Peru. Since EthnoCO mainly operates in Peru, we'll touch on that really quick. So Trichocereus, as Callum said, is a large, cactus with the arms coming out, and contains mescaline. And it's probably been used as evidenced by the cave of the guitarist, for at least 10,000 years. Like I said, we'll touch very briefly on these because we're going to do a whole podcast. Let me look through my notes. We also have Anadenanthera, which at one point in time was the most widely used drug in the Americas, behind tobacco. It is a little circular seed that comes out of a kind of a bean pod thing that comes from a tree, and it's ground up and mixed with ashes or a baking soda-like substance and blown up the nose, which I'll show you. I'll do a little bit of snuff here in a minute. It's tobacco. It's not Yopo snuff. But I'll show some of that in a minute. There's also, of course, tobacco, coca leaf, the fermented alcohol products like masato, which is fermented yucca, or chicha, which is fermented corn. There's various fermented products. Coca is a cocaine-containing leaf, which is chewed as a stimulant, a mild stimulant. Has almost nothing to do with cocaine. Very, very different experience that you gain from chewing these leaves. And there's Brugmansia. Brugmansia contains scopolamine and can be rather dangerous. So yeah, one day we'll cover the sort of the psychoactives of Peru, the Inca culture, and the Americas would take like 10 podcasts because they have so many, especially the Aztecs and the Mayas. I mean, just an amazing amount of psychoactives used by those people. But yeah, Callum, what else do we got?
So just I guess we can go into the breakdown of what each of those are in this episode or in another one. It's going to take a little bit to break them down because a lot of people won't know what they are from our countries. We don't have anything to do with them, really.
If you want to touch on it briefly, I think that's great, but I think we should save it. But if you want to list briefly, up to you.
No, I think there's a lot to unpack out of that, and there's some really interesting, like coca leaf, yopo, anadenanthera, and the whole history of that. That's another time.
And we forgot ayahuasca, which is like the most prominent one from Peru and the Amazon in Western culture right now. But there's many. But yeah, I think we need a whole podcast to.
Yeah.
It'll take a while.
Yep.
So let's see. I'm looking at my notes here. And the last note I have is sort of about the Gardeners of Eden. We may be coming to the end of the podcast now. So me and Callum are working on this podcast, and we're going to have adventures in ethnobotany, which will be a lot of the things you've heard today. These sort of exciting, foreign, and by foreign I mean it's exotic, plants and cultural experiences that we'll talk about. But we also have the Gardeners of Eden series, which is more focused on environmentalism, how we can save this planet, and how we can make our planet a better place for ourselves and other people. So we basically have two series going, and we'll skip back and forth. There will be a note in the title as to which one it is, but we'll skip back and forth. But to touch on the Gardeners of Eden, maybe Callum can say something about that.
That will be that's going to be a really interesting series that we've already started working on, and it will incorporate everything from the current positive role that humans can have on the planet through to how hunting can be a driver for conservation efforts, through to how modern day corporatization and commercialization is actually fueling some of the environmental restoration efforts. And I'm sure there's many, many ideas. It's going to be quite a diverse series on that one.
Yeah. These are both really broad topics. I wanted to show this book by Richard Evan Schultes, one of my heroes. Can you see that well? I'm not on the.
Yep.
Yeah.
Ethnobotany, evolution of a discipline.
He's Richard Evan Schultes, Wade Davis. I mean, I don't think Wade is part of this book, but he. Anyway, these guys are my heroes. Glenn Shepard. Really, really amazing people. Senor Manuel, whose last name I have a hard time pronouncing. Lizarde, I think. Lizarde.
Yeah.
Amazing, amazing people. So the Gardeners of Eden is like we can turn the planet into a toxic wasteland, or we can save and preserve this planet and make it better, not just for ourselves, but for all people, all species. What I will do at the end here, we can also talk about textiles, dye plants. Anyway, what I'm going to do at the end here, because I think we're nearing the end, I'm going to go through the last part of my notes. First, I'll let Callum add anything if he wants to, but I sort of just, to give you a rapid fire idea of all the topics we could talk about, I'll go through that last part of my notes here at the end.
Yeah.
Ready? Anything you want to add, or?
No, probably
Okay.
just about the opportunities available if anyone wants to get involved in EthnoCO.
Well, so this will take a minute. So,
Okay.
we'll add some more stuff at the end, definitely. But I just have on my notes here, it says extra topics. Botanical collection. How do you collect a plant? If you think it's a new plant, perhaps, or a rare plant, how do you collect the seeds? How could you press the plant? We have old school plant presses that it's this sort of wooden and cardboard and paper thing
And
with
it's compacted.
Yeah.
Yep.
With straps that go around it. What's the best way to put a collection number on it? So plant collection, seed collection. What's the best way to preserve your seeds? What's the best way to create a seed bank? Which seeds save for a while and which don't? So that's a podcast we could do. Another one is the miracle fruits. And by miracle fruits, I mean these amazing fruits. If you Google miracle fruit, you'll find it. These amazing fruits that make things taste sweet, but contain no sugar or sugar-like compounds. And I don't mean alternative sweeteners. I mean, you can put this thing in your mouth, the miracle fruit, and you can bite into a lemon, and it tastes like candy. That's a whole
So anything sour, it will convert the flavors in your taste buds to sweet.
Have you tried it?
No, but if you eat the miracle berry, do you chew it? Does it have any effect at all? Do you need it with something sour?
The miracle fruit itself kind of just tastes like a cherry or something.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. But then, so you could drink a Guinness and it tastes like like a chocolate cake or something.
Really? So it converts like bitter flavors and other flavors, not just sour.
It's a highly complex molecule that sort of locks into your taste buds. And as a matter of fact, when we do this, I'm going to order some miracle fruit and I'm going to send it to Callum, and we'll have him try it the first time on camera.
That's it.
But there's a number of them. It's not the only one, and there's a deep history to it. So that's another podcast.
Yeah.
Another podcast we could do is the Oracle of Delphi and other non-biological psychoactives. So not just non-plant psychoactives, but it's theorized that the Oracle of Delphi may have inhaled these gases that were coming out of the earth. So there are non-biological psychoactives that have been historically used as well. That's something we can talk about. And
where's that? Where's that based?
The Oracle of Delphi in ancient Greece.
Oh, right. And on further to that, could talk about
Kaikion.
Yeah. That would be a really interesting exploration.
The
Dionysus?
Yes.
Dionysian cult, something like that.
And the possibly ergot derived psychoactive that all the ancient Greek philosophers went through these the rites of Ulysses.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's another one.
Soma is another one.
What's that?
Soma in India is another one as well.
Yep. A really exciting one that I particularly like is the Haitian zombie and the use of puffer fishes and datura in creating zombies. And then the one I'm most excited about is the animals that are used as drugs and animals that use drugs.
Yep.
Okay, so I have a list.
2 more podcasts at least. So animals that use drugs and are used as drugs, and then another breaking down either the stimulants of the psychoactive group or psychoactives in general, but broken down and explored in detail there.
Oh, we got a bunch.
Or just the Americas.
And then I have a list here of different plants. I don't even know why they're here, but I'm just going to read them. So Anadenanthera, yopo, the snuff that was widely used in the Americas that contains DMT. Ayahuasca, a lot of people know what that is. Bixa oriana, which is this lipstick tree used as a dye in the modern world. Capsicum species, which are hot peppers. There's a huge diversity of those that we could talk about. Hevea brasiliensis, which is the rubber tree. And the rubber boom in the Amazon was like Holocaust. It was a terrible, terrible event that has a lot of history and a lot of effects in the modern day. Cinchona, the quinine bark. A super interesting one. Chandradendrum tomentosum. Chandradendrum tomentosum. Cuare. The arrow poison of the Amazons. And how it became used in the modern world as a surgical paralytic to keep patients from moving while they were under anesthesia. It revolutionized surgery in the early 20th century. Coca leaf. Coca leaf's the whole podcast. As I said previously, the Ilex guayusa, Ilex paragorensis, and Ilex vomitoria, the caffeine-containing holly plants. Tobacco, Paulinia, which is the guarana, another caffeine-containing plant. And then one that Callum knows a lot about is cacao. Cacao.
Chocolate fruit.
Chocolate. So we have got a lot of subjects and podcasts that will be coming to the good people out there listening to us. And all right, you got anything to wrap up?
That sounds great. Yeah, whether we do combinations in single episodes or we break them down into their own individual episodes, there's a lot to cover, and it's going to be super interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's a great introduction though for now.
Yep.
Unless you have anything else you want to add in, just to welcome everyone to the podcast.
Yeah, I'll just say, if you've made it this far, thanks for listening. We got a lot of topics we're going to cover, and this one was very random and all over the place, but we're gonna really dive into these subjects. We'll research them as well as we possibly can on each individual plant or each individual topic. We are gonna have a GoFundMe. Me and Callum want to get new mics and new cameras and a subscription to Spotify, I think, or a sort of the business subscription where we can post on Spotify. You'll see a link for the GoFundMe. Please donate to that if you're so inclined and help us out. But we'll be doing this anyway. So thanks for listening. And we have so many exciting topics that we're going to cover. If you want to know more about what we do, you can go to my website, www.ethnoco.com. That's ETHNOCO.com. And our motto is helping people help plants help people. So I'll let Callum finish up, and then we'll see you all later.
Yeah, that's it. Well, super looking forward to doing the rest of them. all the details will be down below there. And a little bit of snuff or rapé. That's tobacco, and
It's tobacco.
it's tobacco and
covered,
ash, and anything else in there.
Which will be covered in an entire podcast we'll do just about tobacco.
Yeah. Awesome.
Callum, thank you.
Thank you, Scott. That was awesome. Looking forward to the next one.
Me too.
Thanks for tuning in to the EthnoCO podcast, where our motto is helping people, help plants, help people. Please check out the links below and donate to our GoFundMe and Patreon to support the show.
We want to bring you a podcast that is inspiring, exciting, and scholarly, and share a bit of our curiosity about plants, people, anthropology, botany, shamanism, native cultures, environmentalism, and adventures in ethnobotany. Enjoy the show.